Blood spattered across General Naomi Westbrook's Medal of Honor as Officer Cole Radford jammed the cold steel of his service weapon against her temple. It was supposed to be a moment of solemn honor, a sacred tribute at her son's military funeral at Arlington Heights Cemetery, but now under the sweltering Virginia sun it had become something far more chilling. Cameras flashed. Hundreds of mourners froze in place, mouths agape, as the white officer shouted racial slurs at the most decorated black female officer in American military history. His voice cracked the silence like a whip. "You think you're above the law? Time to remind you who's in charge." No one moved. 20 armed officers, all in uniform, stood in silent formation around the perimeter. Some blinked back tears. None intervened. Naomi, in full dress uniform and with decades of discipline in her bones, whispered, "Not today." Her fingers, shaking only slightly, reached out toward her son's folded American flag just as Officer Radford's finger began to tighten on the trigger. The tension in the air was so thick it could choke a man. Then a single gunshot shattered the silence. But before we dive into how the sacred farewell for a fallen soldier became a national flashpoint, a moment of reckoning, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. If you believe in standing up against racial injustice, especially within institutions meant to protect and serve, hit that like button and subscribe. Because what comes next will expose a conspiracy so deep it shakes the foundations of trust in law enforcement and the military. And tomorrow's episode will reveal exclusive footage never seen before of a funeral that became the catalyst for systemic change. Let's go back just 3 days before Arlington Heights became the ground zero of outrage. At 38,000 feet, Naomi Westbrook stared out the window as her flight descended toward Reagan National Airport in Washington, D.C. Below, the Potomac curled like a silver snake through the Capitol. But her thoughts weren't on the view. They were on her son. Captain Michael Westbrook, deployed in Kandahar, Afghanistan, was supposed to come home in August. Instead, his casket had returned draped in the flag he died defending. Naomi had been a soldier for more than 30 years. She'd led troops in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria. She'd climbed through a hierarchy not built for women like her, breaking barriers as she went. Bronze Star. Silver Star. Medal of Honor. None of it could have prepared her to bury her only child. She adjusted the collar of her decorated uniform, a habit forged in the rigid discipline of military life. Usually, it made her feel invincible. Today, it felt like paper armor over a shattered heart. As the plane taxied and the seatbelt light dimmed, a young girl approached, eyes wide. "Are you a general?" she asked. Naomi smiled softly and nodded. The girl's parents beamed, pulling out a notebook for an autograph. "You're a hero," the father whispered. It was the last kind moment she would experience that day. At the TSA security checkpoint, a loud voice interrupted her solemn momentum. "Random additional screening," said Officer Cole Radford, his badge gleaming and his eyes cool as frost. Naomi raised an eyebrow, calmly presenting her military ID. "I've already cleared screening at Fort Hood before my connection. I'm here on urgent family business." Radford looked at her ID with deliberate skepticism. "This looks fake. A black woman as a general? How do I know you didn't steal this uniform?" Gasps echoed from nearby passengers. Naomi's composure never cracked. "Officer, I'm here to bury my son. He died in the service of this country. I'm not going to engage in a debate over my identity." "Likely story," he snapped. "Step aside." What should have taken 5 minutes stretched into 2 humiliating hours. Radford forced her to remove her jacket, medals and all, while he questioned every document and insinuated theft of military property. Each of his comments was sharper than the last. When Naomi's daughter, Maya, a sharp, young civil rights attorney, arrived looking for her, Radford turned his ire on her too. "Interfering with federal screening is grounds for arrest," he said coldly. Eventually, Naomi was released without a single apology. But not before a senior supervisor pulled her aside with a hushed warning. "If you value your freedom, General, don't push this." Officer Radford has friends in high places. As they exited the terminal, Maya seethed. Mom, I'll file the paperwork. We can sue. We can bring this to the media. But Naomi stopped her. Right now, we focus on Michael. We honor your brother. Behind them, Officer Radford watched from a tinted airport security window, speaking softly into a burner phone. Target confirmed. The general is in town. A voice on the other end replied. Good work. The keepers send their regards. It wasn't just racism. It wasn't just abuse of power. Naomi Westbrook had just stumbled into a hornet's nest of institutional rot, a clandestine network of officers who called themselves the Keepers, men sworn not to protect, but to preserve a twisted vision of America where black excellence was seen as a threat, not an achievement. And they had been preparing for her arrival. The following 72 hours would test Naomi's resolve like never before. But she had no idea that the betrayal that killed her son extended from dusty roads in Kandahar all the way back to the shadows of Arlington. And she had no intention of burying her son without burying the lies that killed him. The Westbrook family home sat on the outskirts of Richmond, Virginia, a stately colonial-style house with white pillars, an American flag fluttering from the porch, and 3 generations of service embedded in every wall. Photos of Naomi's father, a Korean War veteran, hung beside portraits of Naomi in combat zones and framed commendations bearing her name. It was a home steeped in duty and sacrifice. On the eve of her son's funeral, Naomi stood alone in her childhood bedroom. The room had remained unchanged since her parents passed it on to her after their retirement. She clutched the trifolded flag from Michael's casket rehearsal, her fingers tracing its sharp corners. For the first time since she received the news of his death, her military bearing cracked. She cried. A knock at the door stirred her from the moment. It creaked open to reveal her father, Colonel Elias Westbrook, retired, a formidable man, now 78, whose cane tapped softly on the hardwood floor. They told me it was enemy fire that took Michael, he said without greeting. I don't believe that for a second. Naomi's tears hadn't dried. Dad, don't please. Elias pulled a worn envelope from his coat pocket and handed it to her. This came for you 2 days ago. I didn't open it, but I nearly did. Thought you might want to read it before tomorrow. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single thumb drive, and a handwritten note in Michael's unmistakable scrawl. If anything happens to me, give this to Mom. Trust no one in uniform except her. Naomi's hands trembled as she inserted the drive into her secure laptop. What unfolded was a nightmare in folders. Dozens of organized files appeared, each labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. At first, she didn't understand what she was looking at. Then the patterns emerged. Photos. Reports. Videos. Surveillance. Names. Incidents. All pointing to one horrifying reality. Michael hadn't just been fighting overseas. He'd been investigating a domestic threat, a shadowy alliance of law enforcement officers and public officials targeting black military personnel across Virginia and other southern states. The group had a name, the Keepers. Naomi clicked through the files in disbelief. Bodycam footage showed traffic stops where black veterans were pulled over and assaulted. Employment rejection letters linked to anonymous background smear reports. Confidential memos flagged internal risk profiles for black officers rising through the ranks. Michael had gathered testimonies from Marines, Air Force captains, and Navy veterans, all reporting the same chilling signs: random surveillance, vandalized property, mysterious reassignments, and, in some cases, violence. He knew something was wrong, Elias said quietly. Your boy, he saw the rot. He saw what was coming. Naomi clicked open a folder labeled, Command Chain, Internal Leaks. There it was, multiple images of Officer Cole Radford, the man who humiliated her at the airport, appearing at off-duty gatherings with other officers, always the same faces. Radford wasn't just a rogue cop, he was a known entity within the network. One document even listed his badge number under an internal code group called Arlington 6, presumed to be local keepers assigned to monitor high-profile black figures arriving in Virginia. Naomi's breathing slowed. Her grief hardened into resolve. Another folder made her stomach twist: Pentagon communication logs. Inside were redacted emails and deployment orders. Several contained Michael's name and unit designation. Her daughter, Maya, walked in, carrying 2 cups of tea. Her expression dropped when she saw the screen. "What is this?" she asked. "Your brother's life's work," Naomi said, her voice steely. "This isn't just about injustice. It's coordinated. And I think it got him killed." Before Maya could respond, the doorbell rang. At the front door stood a young, nervous-looking man mid-30s, Asian American, wearing a patrolman's uniform. "General Westbrook?" he asked. "I'm Officer Daniel Cho. I was working with your son." They let him in. Over coffee at the kitchen table, Cho spoke fast, looking over his shoulder every few minutes. "Michael contacted me 6 months ago after a friend of his, a decorated black Navy commander, was nearly beaten to death during a routine stop. Officially, it was resisting arrest. But the victim was unarmed, sober, and compliant. Michael knew it was part of something bigger." Cho slid over a small notebook. "He told me about a group, the Keepers. Said they were embedded in departments across the state. Judges. Prosecutors. Even military liaisons." Naomi narrowed her eyes. "Why come forward now?" "Because they know you have the files," Cho whispered. "Michael told me if anything happened to him, it would mean they were compromised higher up than we thought. He was getting too close. He suspected someone manipulated his deployment." Maya gasped. "You mean, someone sent him to die?" Cho nodded solemnly. "He told me, 2 weeks before his death, that his deployment orders were rerouted. He was supposed to remain in Kabul working intelligence. Instead, his unit was assigned to Helmand, a region known for high ambush risk. He believed someone wanted him silenced." Naomi stared at the final folder on the drive, Directives, from above. Inside were a string of documents and email screenshots pointing to a horrifying truth: someone at a senior military level had approved Michael's reassignment after receiving a flagged security advisory from a local law enforcement liaison unit. That liaison? Headed by a former state police officer with known connections to Officer Radford. It wasn't just local corruption. It was systemic. Naomi stood slowly from the table. Her voice dropped an octave. "We secure these files. We go to someone who can protect them. Someone outside this chain." Maya nodded. "I'll contact legal networks. If even half of this gets out, it could trigger a civil rights crisis." Officer Cho leaned forward. "I'm in," he said. "Michael was my friend. I won't let what he uncovered die with him." Naomi turned to her father. "Get your gear ready, Dad. We may need to go full military protocol." He grunted. "About damn time." The morning sun filtered through the tall oaks that lined the perimeter of Arlington Heights Cemetery, casting long shadows over its meticulously kept lawns. The cemetery was a sacred place, a resting ground for American heroes going back generations. Captain Michael Westbrook was to be buried in Valor Row, the section reserved for those who gave their lives in combat. That was the plan. General Naomi Westbrook arrived at the administration office just after 8 a.m., crisp in her dress uniform. Every inch of her posture reflected command. But the moment she stepped inside, she sensed something was wrong. The man behind the desk, cemetery director Thomas Bell, a lean, balding man with a taut smile, rose stiffly as if bracing himself for confrontation. "General Westbrook," he said, not quite meeting her eyes, "we have a situation." Naomi's brows tightened. "What kind of situation?" Bell shuffled papers on his desk like a magician trying to stall the inevitable reveal. "There's been an unexpected number of services this month. I regret to inform you that Valor Row has reached temporary capacity. We've made alternative arrangements for your son's burial in our East Garden section. Naomi went silent. She knew exactly what East Garden was. Officially, it was just another section of the cemetery. Unofficially, it had always been referred to by locals as the colored section, a holdover from a pre-integration era that still echoed through policy and practice. Michael had earned Valor Row by sacrifice and rank. This wasn't just disrespect. It was a calculated slight. My son died in Afghanistan, Naomi said slowly. He died as a captain in the United States Army. He's being buried in Valor Row as originally approved per federal military regulations. Bell cleared his throat. I understand your frustration, but I have discretionary authority over final plot placements. This decision has been made. Naomi didn't flinch. She calmly removed a folder from her briefcase and laid it open on the desk. These are federal military burial statutes, state cemetery codes, and a copy of my signed contract with your office clearly designating Plot 17B in Valor Row. Also enclosed is the contact for my legal counsel, my daughter, Maya Westbrook, a civil rights attorney. Bell's throat bobbed as he swallowed. You have two options, Naomi said without raising her voice. Honor the agreement or deal with the consequences of breaching federal burial statutes. We can resolve this professionally, or in court. Before Bell could respond, a quiet voice interrupted from the office doorway. Tom, said a man in a green maintenance uniform, weathered hands gripping the doorframe. You know this isn't right. Bell sighed. Not now, Mike. But the man stepped forward. General Westbrook, I'm sorry for interrupting. My name is Michael Sanders. My son, David, served with Captain Westbrook. They were close. Real close. Naomi's face softened. David Sanders. Michael mentioned him in letters. He said they were brothers in every way except blood. Michael nodded, voice cracking. David was Kia 3 weeks before your son. Same region. Same operation. Naomi gently touched his arm. I'm sorry for your loss. Michael turned to Bell. Tom, show her the picture. Reluctantly, Bell opened a drawer and removed a small framed photograph. It showed two soldiers in combat gear, one black, one white, smiling in the dusty sun, arms wrapped around each other like family. That's David and Michael, Michael Sanders said proudly. 2 days before David's patrol got hit. Bell stared at the photo for a long moment. The lines around his eyes softened as the weight of the image took root. He placed the photo on his desk and stepped back. My son always spoke highly of Captain Westbrook, he said quietly. I didn't know. He looked up at Naomi. I apologize for the confusion, General. We'll proceed with the original arrangement. Valor Row. I'll personally oversee it. As Bell left the office to make adjustments, Sanders lingered. There's something else you need to know, he said in a hushed tone. There's been strange activity here this week. Police officers coming by, some in uniform, others not. Asking about the ceremony, requesting maps of the grounds, even asking where you'd be standing. Naomi's stomach nodded. Any names? No badges shown. But I recognized one of them. The guy from that viral airport clip, Cole Radford. The warning confirmed what Naomi already feared. The keepers weren't just watching. They were planning something. Back at her hotel room that evening, Naomi reviewed security protocols with Maya and Officer Cho. They implemented several emergency measures: private security for the funeral, off-grid comms between Michael's former unit members who would be attending, and discreet placement of multiple surveillance cameras across Valor Row. As she sat down for a brief moment of rest, a hotel concierge knocked gently and handed her a courier envelope. No sender. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A crude drawing of a military funeral. In the sketch, a female officer in full uniform stood by a flag-draped coffin. A red crosshair was drawn over her head. There was no note. But a smudge of dark ink along the bottom edge told her everything she needed to know. Fingerprint ink standard issue in law enforcement. This wasn't a threat from a civilian. It was from inside the system. Naomi stared at the crude sketch in silence, her jaw set. Then she pulled out her phone. Activate protocol red, she said to Maya. Are you sure? Maya asked. Naomi nodded. They want to use Michael's funeral to send a message. But tomorrow. I'll send one back. That night, as clouds rolled over the D.C. skyline and the Potomac shimmered under moonlight, General Naomi Westbrook sat alone with a photograph of her son. She whispered to it like a prayer and a promise. They tried to bury the truth with you, son. But I've got the truth in my hands. And tomorrow, they'll feel it. Dawn broke over Arlington Heights Cemetery in solemn majesty. The early morning light bathed the rows of white markers in a golden hue, as if nature itself mourned with the families whose loved ones rested beneath the soil. By 7 a.m., preparations for Captain Michael Westbrook's funeral were in full motion. Members of the honor guard rehearsed their ceremonial duties with silent reverence. Groundskeepers trimmed the hedges, brushed away fallen leaves, and swept the stone path leading to Valor Row, the section Naomi had fought to reclaim for her son. General Naomi Westbrook arrived early. Her uniform was immaculate. Her face bore the same stoic calm she had worn on countless battlefields. But today, beneath the ribbons and medals, her heart ached not just with grief but with anticipation. Surveillance cameras had been installed discreetly overnight at strategic locations, their feeds routed through an encrypted private channel monitored by Maya and Officer Cho. Michael's former unit members, now civilians and guests at the funeral, were strategically seated, each discreetly armed under federal waiver protocols for active threat environments. By 9 a.m., mourners began arriving in waves. Hundreds came. Veterans in uniform. Fellow soldiers. Families who had served. Local clergy. Political figures. Community activists. Media vans parked just beyond the cemetery gates, antennas reaching skyward like skeletal fingers eager to capture every moment. The eyes of the nation were on this funeral. Naomi noticed them the moment they arrived. Officer Cole Radford, flanked by approximately 20 uniformed police officers, every one of them part of the group Michael had labeled in his files, the Keepers. They weren't there to mourn. They were there to control. Security checkpoints had been erected at every cemetery entrance, unrequested, unauthorized, and unevenly enforced. Naomi's jaw clenched as she watched. White attendees were waved through with quick nods. Black attendees were stopped. Their bags searched. IDs scrutinized. In some cases, they were turned away, for security concerns. A group of black veterans, all of whom had served with Michael, were forced to wait nearly 30 minutes while their backgrounds were re-verified. When Maya attempted to intervene, a young officer threatened her with arrest for disrupting police operations. By 10 a.m., when the funeral was set to begin, the seating told the story plainly: white mourners at the front, black attendees pushed to the back, behind barricades, many unable to see or hear the ceremony. And still, Naomi remained composed. She took her place at the front row beside her father, Elias, and her daughter Maya, all in formal attire. She refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. This was Michael's day. And she wouldn't let them defile it with rage. The ceremony began with the tolling of a military bell. The chaplain spoke of duty, service, and sacrifice. Fellow officers took turns recounting Michael's courage, leadership, and integrity. Tears streamed down faces across the divided crowd. Naomi sat tall, unmoving, absorbing every word. And then came her turn. The moment General Naomi Westbrook stood and approached the podium, the entire cemetery fell silent. A sea of cameras turned toward her. She paused, glanced down at her son's casket, and then faced the mourners. "My son," she began, believed in an America worth fighting for, even when that belief came at great personal cost. Her voice was steady. Strong. Even. He believed in an America that could rise above its flaws, that could grow into its promise of justice for all. He believed that patriotism meant holding your country accountable, not just serving it blindly. As she spoke, she noticed Radford moving. He was speaking into his shoulder mic. Other keepers around the perimeter began adjusting their positions, hands resting on belts, eyes sweeping the crowd. Some subtly placed hands on holstered weapons. Naomi continued, unshaken. My son saw injustice and refused to look away. He believed that leadership required integrity even when it meant putting himself in danger. She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out a folded letter. This was sent to me after his death. A murmur rose through the crowd. In this letter, Michael detailed a disturbing pattern. He uncovered a coordinated effort to target black military personnel for harassment, intimidation, and worse, especially those who dared to rise too high. Naomi unfolded the letter slowly. Her hands never shook. Mom, what I've discovered goes beyond personal racism. There is a structure to it. They call themselves the Keepers. They monitor us. Intimidate us. They believe we don't belong at the top. If something happens to me, make sure this gets to someone who can finish the job. Naomi folded the letter again, her face unreadable. At that moment, the honor guard stepped forward. A young white sergeant, tears in his eyes, held out the folded flag. On behalf of the President of the United States, the U.S. Army, and a grateful nation, he said, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your loved one's honorable and faithful service. Naomi reached for the flag, her hand trembling slightly. Finally, a visible crack in her composure. It was at that precise second Officer Radford made his move. He shoved past the honor guard, drew his weapon, and shouted, General Westbrook, you need to come with me. Now. The crowd gasped. Cameras zoomed in. Maya screamed. Radford's gun pressed against Naomi's temple. The cold steel bit into her skin. Blood trickled from a small cut caused by the sight on his gun, staining the edge of her Medal of Honor. This black bitch thinks she's untouchable, he snarled, loud enough for everyone to hear. Time to remind her who runs this country. For a full 5 seconds, no one moved. Then bang. A single gunshot rang out. Not from Radford's weapon but from his partner, Officer Travis Dunn, who had fired into the air while shouting, she's reaching for a weapon. Panic erupted. Radford tackled Naomi to the ground. The flag fell from her hands into the dirt. She's armed, he shouted, though Naomi had clearly been holding only the flag. Amid the chaos, Maya's voice cut through like a blade. It's on video. Every second is on video. Indeed, dozens of phones and news cameras had captured everything from the moment Naomi spoke to the second Radford assaulted her. Still, he wrenched her arms behind her back, forcing her face into the grass beside her son's grave. You're under arrest, he shouted. Assaulting a police officer. Attempted use of a concealed weapon at a public gathering. Naomi didn't resist. She didn't scream. She simply stared ahead, her eyes burning not with fear, but with memory. She had once stood on foreign battlefields and buried fallen comrades. Now, she lay in the dirt, dishonored by the country she had given her life to defend. Her father tried to intervene, old, frail, but was restrained. Maya was shoved backward. Michael's fellow soldiers moved forward in defense, but froze as several keepers unholstered weapons. Anyone steps forward, Officer Dunn warned, they go down. Then, a deep voice broke through the noise. What in God's name is happening here? A tall black man in a dark federal suit approached the chaos, flanked by 2 federal agents. FBI Special Agent Malcolm Carter, he said, holding up his badge. Someone explain why a general is being arrested at her own son's funeral. Radford kept his grip. She's under arrest. Local jurisdiction. That's a lie, several mourners shouted. I see no weapon, Carter said. Release the general. Now. She'll be processed downtown, Radford insisted. No, Carter replied. She's in our custody. She's a federal witness in an ongoing civil rights investigation. Cameras captured every moment. Radford refused. And in the next moment a scuffle broke out. Phones were seized. Journalists pushed. Naomi was dragged away. But before she disappeared into a cruiser, she looked back straight at the cameras. And the world saw everything. The holding cell at Alexandria County Jail was as cold and sterile as the system that had put her there. Concrete walls painted beige. A flickering fluorescent light that buzzed overhead. A steel bench bolted to the wall. No pillow. No warmth. No mercy. General Naomi Westbrook, still in her full dress uniform now soiled with dirt from the cemetery, sat upright, her posture rigid despite the exhaustion gnawing at her spine. Her Medal of Honor was gone, torn during her arrest. Her arms bore bruises from the handcuffs, and dried blood clung to her temple from Officer Radford's weapon. It had been over 6 hours. No phone call. No attorney. No medical attention. Her every request had been ignored. When the cell door finally opened, a female correctional officer entered. Her name tag read Officer Linda Halston. She carried herself with a stiff, conflicted energy as though battling an internal storm. General Westbrook, she said curtly, eyes avoiding direct contact. You're being transferred to general population. Naomi stood, her bearing unshaken. I am a federal witness and a military officer unlawfully detained. I demand to speak with my legal counsel. Halston lowered her voice. You've been reclassified as a security risk. On orders from Judge Ronald Mercer. Naomi froze. That name wasn't unfamiliar. Michael's files had flagged Mercer a judge with a disturbing history of handing down harsher sentences to black defendants, particularly those with military backgrounds. His decisions had often been cited in judicial reviews, but none had stuck. Now he was presiding over her case. On what grounds am I considered a security risk? Naomi asked calmly. Halston's voice barely carried. They're claiming you attempted to assault a police officer and reach for a weapon at a public event. Charges include attempted murder. The absurdity of the accusation was laughable, except it wasn't. It was strategy. Maximum security holding. No bail. Limited attorney access. Media blackout. Textbook suppression. As Halston escorted her through the corridors, whispers followed. Inmates, some in orange jumpsuits, others in faded denim, peeked through cell bars. That's the general, one muttered. From the funeral. She's the one the cops tried to silence. Inside the general population wing, Naomi's presence shifted the room. Conversation stopped. A stillness fell like fog. And then, a woman emerged from the crowd, a tall, broad-shouldered inmate with cornrows and sharp eyes. General Westbrook, she asked. Naomi nodded cautiously. The woman extended a hand. Teresa Monroe. My brother served under you in Ramadi. 3rd Infantry. He said you didn't leave a single man behind. Said you were the only officer who stood up when no one else would. Naomi hesitated, then shook her hand. Teresa glanced around, then added quietly, you're under our protection now. Within hours, an invisible shield formed around her. Inmates with military ties, sisters of service members, mothers of fallen soldiers, they shared what they could. Extra food portions. Clean towels. A plastic bag tied around the leaking faucet in her cell to stop the dripping. Small acts of resistance in a system that wanted her broken. That night, Officer Halston returned during the night shift. She entered quietly, carrying a food tray. Tucked beneath the bread was a burner phone. You've got 5 minutes, she whispered. I shouldn't be doing this. But this isn't right. Naomi didn't waste time. She called Maya. Mom. Maya's voice cracked through the line. We've been trying everything. The videos are everywhere. You're trending worldwide. Naomi's voice was low, clipped. Listen carefully. Judge Mercer is part of the network. He's blocking all legal access. You need to contact Agent Carter. Tell him to check Michael's Pentagon files for judicial connections. We're on it. The Pentagon's already called twice. They're furious, Maya said. Veterans from all over are outside the jail. In uniform. Peaceful. Watching. Naomi exhaled softly. Then we have a chance. Before she could say more, voices echoed from the hallway. She handed the phone back to Halston and returned to her bed just as a group of correctional officers entered. Surprise inspection, barked the lead officer supervisor Dale Kirk, a thick-necked man with a visible disdain for uniforms not worn in blue. Naomi was ordered against the wall as guards overturned her mattress, confiscated her belongings, and discovered a plastic spoon under her bed. Contraband, Kirk sneered. More restrictions starting tomorrow. As he leaned in close, he whispered just loud enough for her to hear. The keepers send their regards. That night, they turned off the heat in her wing. Left the lights on. Scheduled welfare checks every 15 minutes. No rest. No silence. Only the slow erosion of body and mind. By sunrise, Naomi understood what they were doing. Sleep deprivation. Isolation. Psychological warfare. She had used these tactics in military training. Now, they were using them on her. But they had made one mistake. They had assumed she would fold. The next day, during lunch, a new inmate was introduced. A muscular woman with a cruel smirk and aggressive stance. She made no attempt to hide her intention. That's the bitch they want taken care of, she said loudly to the room. Before she could take a step, Teresa Monroe stepped in. You touch her, she warned, you deal with all of us. The tension held like a loaded spring. Several inmates stood behind Teresa. A silent wall. A declaration. The guards watched. They did nothing. It was a setup waiting for violence to erupt so they could claim Naomi was a danger to others. It failed. That evening, Officer Halston slipped Naomi a folded note during tray collection. FBI demanding access. Judge still blocking. Lawyer coming tomorrow. Stay safe. On the third morning, chaos erupted outside the cell block. Guards moved faster. Radios crackled. Supervisor Kirk arrived red-faced. Get your things, Westbrook. Court order. You're being released. Naomi stared. Why? Kirk grunted. Ask your friends in D.C. Outside the jail, the air hit her like a wave of clarity. Hundreds of people lined the sidewalk. Veterans. Activists. Reporters. Every camera pointed at the steel door as Naomi emerged still in her tattered uniform, shoulders straight, gaze unbowed. Maya rushed forward, hugging her tightly. The judge overruled Mercer. Agent Carter pressured the circuit court. You're free for now. As they walked toward the waiting vehicle, Naomi spotted Halston watching from the side gate. Their eyes met. A silent nod passed between them. Even inside a broken system there were still cracks where light could get through. The car ride away from Alexandria County Jail was quiet. Not because there was nothing to say but because too much had happened to find the right words. General Naomi Westbrook sat beside her daughter Maya, hands folded tightly in her lap, her uniform wrinkled and still stained with cemetery dirt. A block away, across from the courthouse, a wall of veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, saluting as she passed. Marines in dress blues. Army Rangers in berets. Airmen in gray flight jackets. Silent, immovable like stone sentinels guarding one of their own. Do they know? Naomi finally asked, voice quiet. Not everything, Maya replied. But enough. The videos went viral. The arrest. The gun to your head. People saw it all. What about Carter? Already setting up the war room, Maya said. We've got a secure location. Evidence drop. Communications blackout. And Mom. Naomi turned toward her daughter. We're not alone anymore. By the time they arrived at the safe house in Falls Church, a team was already inside: a former military legal advisor, a digital forensic expert, 2 FBI analysts from Carter's unit, and Officer Daniel Cho, who still bore the bruises from his assault days earlier. The house was unremarkable on the outside. Neutral paint, closed shutters. But inside, it had been transformed into a miniature command center. Satellite phones buzzed softly on the kitchen table. Laptops hummed on counters. Printouts of organizational charts and deployment records covered one wall, layered with string, arrows, and names: Gaines, Radford, Mercer, Maxwell. Welcome back to the fight, General, said Special Agent Malcolm Carter, stepping forward. Naomi extended her hand. I never left it. Carter handed her a fresh uniform jacket. It's time you suited up again. They called it the counterattack not because it was an act of vengeance, but because for the first time, the resistance had an offensive strategy. The team gathered around a dining room table converted into a tactical desk. Naomi stood at the head like she had so many times in forward operating bases. She pointed to the core files extracted from Michael's thumb drive and Cho's hidden backups. This is the operational map of the Keepers. They're not just a group of rogue cops. They are an organized, distributed cell with access to military liaisons, judicial authorities, and deployment scheduling. Agent Carter nodded. And now we have proof. Cho stepped forward, plugging in a secondary flash drive. They missed this one. I had it secured off-network. These are audio files, recordings of Chief Albert Gaines and Officer Radford. He pressed play. You let her speak at that funeral, and we lose the whole damn structure. It's handled. One move, one trigger, and she's done. If she twitches, it's a threat. That's all we need. And the orders from the senator? Still flowing. Maxwell wants her silenced. No loose ends before the campaign. The room went still. Even the hum of the electronics seemed to pause. Maxwell? Maya repeated, her jaw tightening. We finally have it on record. Agent Carter pulled out a printed transcript. This, combined with the surveillance of Officer Radford's behavior and Judge Mercer's illegal detention orders, gives us a basis to expand the federal case. They divided the operation into 3 fronts. Legal action: Maya and the JAG advisor would begin preparing civil rights lawsuits, judicial misconduct complaints, and Freedom of Information Act requests to force the system to open. Media and public pressure: a select handful of reporters from trusted national outlets would be given access to raw, unedited footage from the funeral, arrest and jail abuse. The message: this isn't just misconduct. It's systemic sabotage. Direct confrontation: Naomi herself would go undercover with hidden surveillance gear provided by federal tech teams to bait Chief Gaines into admitting the true scope of the conspiracy. They would push him, record everything, and leak it fast and wide. That same night, across town, Senator Howard Maxwell was addressing a private fundraising dinner at the exclusive Potomac Heritage Club, flanked by billionaires and state officials. Maxwell, a 70-year-old conservative powerhouse, was on the cusp of launching his gubernatorial campaign. Our way of life is under attack, he said, wine in hand. General Westbrook is being weaponized to dismantle law enforcement and destroy traditional values. We cannot let this narrative stand. What he didn't know was that one of the catering staff, a soft-spoken black man refilling wine glasses, was an FBI plant wearing a wire. Maxwell continued. The keepers? They've kept order for decades. I helped organize the first unit when I was commissioner. We needed a way to make sure certain people didn't rise too fast. The public doesn't understand their structure for a reason. By midnight, that recording was being uploaded to encrypted Justice Department servers. The next morning, Naomi sat across from Chief Gaines inside D.C. Metro Police Headquarters. She wore civilian attire, casual, subdued. Her surveillance pin was activated. Carter's agents were monitoring in real time. "I want to make peace," Naomi began. "The funeral, it broke me. The country's watching, and I just want to move forward." Gaines, polished and smug behind his desk, leaned back. "I'm glad you came, Naomi," he said, dropping formalities. "You were always a good soldier. That's why this hurts. You broke rank." She tilted her head. "For telling the truth." He gave her a tight-lipped smile. "Sometimes keeping order means choosing which truths get to breathe." Naomi didn't blink. "Did you choose for Michael to die?" Gaines' smile faltered. "I didn't choose anything. I just signed off on a personnel file that came across my desk. A reassignment. Standard. From where?" He shrugged. "Senator's office forwarded concerns about your son. Said he was stirring up dissent among active officers. That's not my lane. I passed it along." Naomi leaned forward. "And my security clearance? The federal raids? The media hit jobs?" He scoffed. "Senator Maxwell's people have deep pockets. They've got friends in Homeland, Pentagon liaisons, defense contractors. Once the wheels start turning." He trailed off. But Naomi had heard enough. When she left the building, her expression was steel. Behind her, the FBI already had enough to move. Within 24 hours, the first wave of federal raids struck across Virginia and into D.C. Chief Gaines was arrested at home by federal agents. Officer Radford, already suspended, was redetained and charged with civil rights violations, assault, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. Judge Mercer's office was seized. Documents, hard drives, and encrypted files were collected under warrant. Footage of law enforcement officers being walked out in handcuffs rolled non-stop on the news. Breaking: federal agents dismantle rogue network of officers tied to discrimination ring targeting black service members. But it was the press conference that cemented the turning tide. Standing before a podium at the Justice Department, Naomi Westbrook, now in a restored uniform with medals shining, spoke plainly. This was never about one funeral. Or one officer. This was about a system designed to silence voices that threaten the status quo. My son died trying to expose it. I intend to finish what he started. By the time she stepped down, hashtags were trending globally, hashtag Justice for Michael. Hashtag Dismantle the Keepers, hashtag Naomi Westbrook Truth. But the opposition wasn't done. Within hours, Senator Maxwell went live on a conservative news network, painting himself as the victim of a deep state ambush. They're targeting me for defending law enforcement, he said, hand on heart. This is political theater. But then, the recording dropped. The fundraiser wiretap. His voice. His words. His admission. He froze mid-campaign. His press secretary resigned. Donors pulled funding. One by one, his political firewall crumbled. But Maxwell still had one card left. The counterattack. Within 48 hours, anonymous claims surfaced alleging Naomi had falsified elements of her military record. Alt-right media accused her of using her son's death for political gain. Troll accounts flooded comment sections. Leaked and doctored, classified memos painted her as unstable, implying she had been under psychological review. Naomi responded not with words but with evidence. Agent Carter released the full timeline of the conspiracy. Surveillance videos. Deployment orders. Financial records. And then came the knockout punch, a final audio file from a tapped call between Maxwell and Gaines. "That boy's digging too deep. Move him to Hellmand. Let the desert take care of the rest." The implication was unmistakable: Michael Westbrook had been targeted for death. The corridors of the Pentagon were colder than Naomi remembered. Not in temperature, but in spirit. As she walked past rows of high-ranking officials, most offered her no more than a curt nod or blank stare. Some averted their eyes entirely. Others whispered once they thought she was out of earshot. She felt it all: the quiet doubt, the subtle disdain, the discomfort of those who once shook her hand now fearing she had become radioactive. But Naomi Westbrook had never asked to be liked. She had asked to be heard. And now, for the first time in her career, she wasn't speaking to battalions. She was preparing to address a nation. 3 days had passed since the raids. Since the arrest of Chief Gaines, the suspension of Officer Radford, the wiretap of Senator Maxwell. The Justice Department had confirmed that formal charges were imminent. But the deeper Naomi and Carter's team pushed into the evidence trail, the more resistance they encountered, not from the shadows, but from within institutions that had sworn allegiance to justice. Documents flagged for deletion. Witnesses intimidated. Internal affairs officers suddenly transferred. As if some invisible hand was working overtime to cauterize the infection before it could reach the heart. And the heart was here. Washington. The Pentagon. The place where deployment orders were issued. Where promotions were decided. Where lives were steered, sometimes toward valor, sometimes into crossfire. Naomi sat across from General Clay Richards, her former superior officer. A man who had once pinned a silver star on her chest. Today, his voice was low, his eyes heavy. "Naomi," he began, "I'm under orders to inform you that your security clearance is now under formal review. Not suspended, but active surveillance." Naomi didn't blink. "On what basis?" "An anonymous internal review flagged potential instability, citing your actions during the funeral and post-arrest conduct. There are also questions about your chain of command compliance in prior tours." She stared at him. "You and I both know this is retaliation. And you know exactly who's behind it." Richard sighed. "I didn't come here to argue. I came to tell you off the record there are people very high up who want you neutralized. Not because they think you're dangerous to national security, but because you're dangerous to their version of it." Naomi leaned in. "You're a 4-star general. If you're afraid, what message does that send?" Richards hesitated. Then, almost too quietly, "I'm not afraid. I'm calculating." Naomi stood, voice steel. "Then calculate this. If they take me down, I go down loud. And I take the whole damn building with me." By the next morning, Naomi was back in her civilian clothes, standing in front of the House Oversight Committee. Cameras lined the back of the chamber. Every major network streamed live. Maya sat in the row behind her, flanked by veterans in uniform, Amara's legal colleagues, and Officer Daniel Cho, still recovering, but present. When the chair recognized her to speak, Naomi adjusted the microphone and began without notes. "Chairwoman Reyes, members of Congress, citizens watching, thank you for allowing me to testify today. My name is General Naomi Westbrook. I have served this country for over 30 years. I've led troops in combat, trained the next generation of officers, and been decorated with the highest honors. I stand before you today not because of what I achieved, but because of what was taken from me. My son, Captain Michael Westbrook, was not killed by enemy fire alone. He was targeted. Not by insurgents overseas, but by cowards within our own system. A system that rewards loyalty over truth, silence over accountability." A hush fell over the chamber. Naomi continued, voice unwavering. "Michael uncovered a network, a covert alliance of law enforcement officers, military liaisons, and political figures who operated under the belief that black service members who rose too quickly were a threat to their order. They called themselves the Keepers. He documented their activities. He shared the evidence with me before his death. And when I tried to bury my son with dignity, they turned his funeral into a theater of intimidation. She paused, letting the silence stretch. I was arrested at his grave. A gun was held to my head. My arms were twisted behind my back while I was still mourning my child. And when I was dragged into a jail cell, they tried to break me. Not with fists. With bureaucracy. With cruelty. With silence. But I did not break. And I will not stop. Gasps rose across the gallery. Some committee members whispered among themselves. Naomi pressed forward. You will hear spin. You will hear denials. You will hear people tell you this was an isolated incident, that my son was in the wrong place, that the officers involved acted with cause. But the truth doesn't require their permission to exist. And the truth is this: what happened to my son, what happened to me, what continues to happen to service members of color across this country is a betrayal of the oath every one of us takes. To support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Her voice dropped, slow and deliberate. And this was domestic. Reporters typed feverishly. Live feeds flooded Twitter. Hashtags like hashtag General Westbrook and hashtag Systemic Truth surged in real time. When Naomi finished, a stunned stillness lingered. Then, applause broke out not from the politicians, but from the audience. Veterans. Families. Citizens. Some with tears in their eyes. Behind the scenes, the machine began to move. The Defense Department issued a statement calling the testimony deeply concerning. The Pentagon announced a formal investigation into deployment order manipulation. The President released a brief but pointed comment: we owe our military families justice, truth, and unwavering support. I am monitoring the developments closely. Senator Maxwell, meanwhile, was cornered. Reporters hounded him at every turn. His campaign was suspended indefinitely. Leaked emails, wiretaps, and financial documents piled against him. And then, in a final blow, one of his closest aides flipped, confirming Maxwell's role in directing Captain Michael Westbrook's reassignment under the guise of disciplinary protocol. The Justice Department filed formal charges. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Abuse of power. Naomi watched it all unfold not with triumph but with grim clarity. This wasn't a victory. It was a reckoning. And it wasn't over. As she walked back into the safe house that night, Agent Carter greeted her with news. They've initiated a back-channel audit of every officer connected to the gatekeeper list. It's worse than we thought. At least 6 other military deaths show suspicious orders. 4 more active duty black officers have reported recent threats. Naomi's face hardened. Then we go public again. Carter raised an eyebrow. More testimony. Not just me, she said. All of them. Every survivor. Every witness. Every parent who buried a child in silence. Over the next 72 hours, Naomi and her allies began building a coalition. Veterans groups. Whistleblowers. Internal affairs officers who had once been afraid. They launched a secure platform for victims of gatekeeper-related abuse to come forward. Within a week, over 400 submissions were filed. Patterns emerged. Names overlapped. The system that once protected the keepers had become their paper trail. The tide had shifted. And yet, Naomi knew the most dangerous enemy wasn't those exposed. It was those still hidden. Still powerful. Still calculating in the dark. But what they didn't count on, what they never understood, was that Naomi Westbrook didn't fear darkness. She had trained in it. Fought in it. And now, she would lead others through it. Not just as a general. But as a mother. A witness. And a warrior for the truth. The weight of power had always rested on her shoulders. But now at last it was beginning to crush those who once used it to destroy others. The morning of the rededication ceremony arrived with a sense of solemnity that blanketed Arlington Heights Cemetery. The air was cool, touched with the scent of damp grass and spring rain. For the first time in over a year, the crowds were not there to protest, or bear witness to cruelty. They had come to honor, to heal, and to begin again. The cemetery, once marked by silent segregation and institutional indifference, had been officially renamed Heroes Memorial Cemetery. The name was etched into new stone archways at the entrance, flanked by American flags at half-mast. At the center of the newly constructed Memorial Plaza stood a sleek marble wall, engraved with the names of fallen service members who had faced institutional discrimination. At the top of the list was one name carved slightly deeper than the rest. Captain Michael D. Westbrook. General Naomi Westbrook stood before it, resplendent in a freshly tailored dress uniform. A fourth star now sat on her shoulder. Her posture was perfect, but this time, it wasn't about formality. It was about memory, dignity, and a promise finally fulfilled. Beside her stood her daughter, Maya, dressed in a navy blue suit. Her legal fight had helped bring the gatekeepers to light and inspired a new generation of civil rights attorneys across the country. On Naomi's other side stood Officer Daniel Cho, now Lieutenant Cho, promoted for his role in exposing corruption and helping dismantle one of the most insidious law enforcement networks in modern American history. The ceremony began with a 21-gun salute, followed by the somber strains of taps echoing across the hills. Veterans from all branches stood at attention. Military officials in full regalia lined the walkways. Civilians held hands over their hearts. Even members of Congress were present this time, not to listen with silence, but to act with accountability. As the final note faded, Governor Elias Davis of Virginia stepped forward. He approached the podium and looked over the crowd with heavy eyes. Today, we gather not only to finish a funeral interrupted by injustice, but to begin a legacy of truth carved into the foundation of this state. He unrolled a scroll and held it aloft. I hereby sign into law the Michael Westbrook Military Justice Act, legislation that guarantees every service member returning to Virginia will be shielded from discriminatory law enforcement practices, with independent oversight, rapid response legal assistance, and civilian review panels. Applause rose, not like the spontaneous kind that followed outrage, but the grounded applause of citizens who had demanded change and now saw it realized. As the governor stepped down, Naomi took the stage. She glanced at the camera crews, the reporters, and then beyond them to the quiet presence of military families holding photographs of their own fallen loved ones. My son, she began, was a soldier who believed in systems, even as he exposed their cracks. He believed in serving a country that didn't always serve him back. And when he uncovered a truth that frightened the powerful, he was silenced not by war, but by men wearing the same flag he wore on his shoulder. Her voice was steady, but emotion glistened in her eyes. This wall behind me does not fix what we lost. But it ensures that we remember. And remembering is the first step to rebuilding a better future. The audience stood in complete silence, reverent. And then, slowly, as Naomi descended the podium, a murmur spread through the crowd. Turning heads. Raised phones. A collective intake of breath. A man was walking toward the front. Surrounded by federal marshals. Handcuffed. Dressed in a dark gray suit, now wrinkled and soiled. It was Senator Howard Maxwell, escorted under court order to attend the rededication as part of his plea agreement, an unprecedented requirement written into the terms of his federal conviction. Maxwell had been found guilty on multiple counts: conspiracy to obstruct justice, manipulation of federal military operations, abuse of public office, and, most damning of all, negligent homicide connected to Michael Westbrook's reassignment and death. He faced 40 years in federal prison. His presence at the ceremony wasn't for optics. It was for confrontation. He tried to speak as he reached Naomi, tried to extend a hand, but she did not take it. Instead, she reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver object, the recording device Michael had used to capture the final moments of his investigation, the very item that had sealed Maxwell's fate. "I believe this belongs to you," she said coldly. "You left it behind in Helmand province after you condemned my son." Gasps spread across the crowd. The marshals led Maxwell away. That moment would play on every major network within the hour, and would become one of the most shared clips on social media in modern political history. But Naomi didn't linger on it. She turned back to her son's grave, knelt beside the marble headstone, and finally placed the folded flag from a year ago now encased in glass at its base. She whispered something only Michael could hear. Then she stood, took 3 steps back, and saluted. One last time. In the weeks that followed, the ripples of Naomi's fight spread across the nation. The Department of Defense launched Project Sentinel, a multi-branch initiative aimed at identifying and eliminating discriminatory influence within military command structures. Oversight was placed under civilian review. Whistleblower protections were expanded. The Inspector General's office began a backlog investigation of over 300 questionable military reassignments from the last 2 decades. Law enforcement agencies across 11 states were audited for gatekeeper influence. Dozens of officers were suspended or terminated. Several police departments, including the D.C. Metro Division, entered federal consent decrees mandating sweeping reforms. Naomi herself was appointed senior advisor for military justice and equity at the Pentagon, reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense. But she didn't stop there. She founded the Westbrook Foundation for Military Integrity, a nonprofit organization providing legal, psychological, and community support to service members who faced racial or institutional retaliation. The foundation offered pro bono representation, scholarships for children of victims, and a 24/7 hotline for whistleblowers in uniform. Its headquarters opened just 6 months later in a converted federal building, blocks from the White House. Officer Daniel Cho led a new internal police integrity task force, focused on rooting out bias from the inside. Maya's firm received national recognition, and she began teaching at Howard Law School using her mother's story as the opening case study in her civil rights seminar. But for Naomi, the transformation wasn't only about policy. It was personal. One evening, exactly 1 year after Michael's funeral had been disrupted, she returned to Heroes Memorial Cemetery alone. Dressed in civilian clothes, without fanfare, she walked the long path toward his grave. In her hand, she carried a journal. Michael's journal. Recovered from his belongings in Afghanistan, it had arrived late, delayed by bureaucracy, then by sabotage, then forgotten during the chaos. But now, here it was. She sat beside the stone, opened the cover, and read the first page aloud. "I used to think being a soldier was about being tough. Now I know it's about being human. About doing the right thing even when no one's watching. Especially then." Naomi smiled softly. "You were watching," she whispered. "And now so is the world." The wind picked up around her, rustling the grass. In that moment, it wasn't about ranks. Or titles. Or medals. It was about truth. Justice. And the boy who had dared to confront power not with rage but with evidence. With faith. With courage. That courage had dismantled an empire. And in its place, built something enduring. A new inscription was added beneath Michael's name on the memorial wall. It read, "He exposed what others feared to name and changed the course of a nation." Across the country, service members began to speak more openly. Military culture shifted slowly but permanently. Black officers rose to new heights with less resistance. Investigative protections held. And in Washington, a new tradition began. Every year on the anniversary of the rededication, the President of the United States lays a wreath not only at the tomb of the unknown soldier but also at Captain Michael Westbrook's grave. Not just for who he was, but for what his family made the world see. Justice is not a moment. It's a movement. And through Naomi Westbrook's unyielding will, that movement rose louder than silence, stronger than corruption, and brighter than any lie ever whispered in darkness. If we stay silent, the system stays broken. But when we speak, when we act, when we refuse to let injustice pass unnoticed, change becomes inevitable. This isn't just General Naomi Westbrook's fight. It's ours. For every veteran silenced by bureaucracy, for every voice dismissed because of their skin, gender, or truth, this story is a mirror and a warning. The benefit of truth isn't abstract, it's life-changing. It means protection for the next soldier. Justice for the next family. Reform for the next generation. But it only happens when you move from awareness to action. Share this story with someone who needs to understand what real courage looks like. Comment #JusticeRises if you believe no uniform should hide corruption. Support organizations like the Westbrook Foundation that protect whistleblowers and fight for systemic reform. Don't just scroll past this moment. Stand in it. Rise from it. And push forward. Because justice delayed is not just justice denied, it's a life interrupted. And the time to interrupt that cycle is now.